welcome to Human Ascension with Ellie. Today is episode 41. Can you believe we've been doing this for at least 40 weeks? And it's been amazing. I've actually really enjoyed doing this show. It's difficult sometimes to get myself kind of organized for the very strict schedule of programming. It's often difficult for me to stick to my up to 56 minutes of recording time so that I don't encroach into anyone else's show. And it demonstrates that, you know what, I thought I was disciplined, but I still have work to do. However, I really love talking to you. We've talked about a lot of things, and we have managed to find correlations between science and the ancient wisdoms, theology, the secret gospels, the whole alien debate, and the concept of ancient aliens and the beginnings of humanity, and whether we come from that scientific evolutionary standpoint, or whether we might be star seeds that fell from the cosmos and have developed into something else. I've actually even looked at the book of Revelation and looked at it from a perspective of whether or not it has been properly interpreted. And in particular, even the book of Genesis in the Old Testament, looking at the creation of humanity, the story of Adam and Eve, and all kinds of things to question whether or not we are who we officially seem to think we are and where we may have come from, and looking at clues as to what reality might be and where we may be going in the future. One thing I've noticed as I'm researching for my show every single week is that people are talking about human ascension a lot. They're talking about raising consciousness, raising awareness, making that shift from the third dimension into the fifth dimension. And there's a general assumption out there that we are moving forwards and that we're moving upwards. But you know what? We may not be. We may actually be moving backwards, and we may be moving downwards. We might be descending. And nobody really is talking about that. And the reason why, I believe, and this is just my theory, but the reason why they're not talking about that is because it doesn't pay well to talk about that. It pays much more in terms of acquisition of popularity and wealth, and being able to market yourself as someone who knows the future and can help people to get the future that they want. It helps to be able to provide a positive, inspirational outlook. But you know what I think is also positive and inspirational? In fact, I think it might be even more important, and that is to try to find out the key to, or the keys to, and help people also to discover how to navigate anything that might prevent ascension, that might prevent that move forward. So I want to go back to a previous episode that I did, and this was about the spiraling circular nature of the ages of humanity as described by the Greek philosophers long prior to when the Bible was created. And there are four general ages. Well, there's also a fifth one that's been slipped in, but the four general ages are the Golden Age, which is considered to be the age in which that lost civilization of Atlantis existed, where the feminine element or the feminine divine was revered and was considered to be an equal influence, if not a superior influence or a dominant influence over humanity in comparison to the masculine divine, where technology and spirituality were at their heightened place. People were taller, they were lighter, they were routinely psychic in nature, were able to perform all kinds of supernatural feats, and they worshipped a complex variety of gods. It's believed that Atlantis is an example of a civilization that was far more advanced than we are today, except it seemed to kind of lose its grip. And as a result of that, in the way that's been described in the Bible, but also in other secret writings and ancient writings and competing viewpoints, including almost every tradition, including every native tradition around the world and other religions. The god or gods or divine element that created humanity became so disillusioned with humanity's progression as it became so advanced in technology and enlightenment that it decided that it was just corrupted and it had to be destroyed. And so therefore it brought about this massive flood that wiped out pretty much everyone, and humanity had to start again. There's detail of that in the Book of Enoch. There's detail of that in Genesis, kind of linking Noah to the Book of Enoch. It seems as though the Book of Enoch is like a chapter that's been taken out of the Bible and just sort of shoved into a drawer because it was a bit inconvenient. And it talks about these fallen angels that cohabitated with humans and created a new race of people that were the Nephilim, that were the giants, that kind of are also described as being part of the downfall of humanity in its first or earlier iteration. The Golden Age and the Great Flood and the destruction of Atlantis is complex, and I would urge you to go back to previous episodes to understand it better. But for the purposes of today, it demonstrates that there are viewpoints out there dating back thousands of years that have an understanding that humanity kind of ruined it for themselves, or ruined it for ourselves, and had to be destroyed in order to make way for another cycle to begin. But instead of going upwards, humanity went downwards into a silver age. And that's my point. The philosophers believe that the Silver Age was what happened next, followed by the Bronze Age, which was even less advanced. And then there was a spiraling into the Iron Age, which is considered to be an age of darkness and turmoil, where humanity faced a lot of suffering and a lot of moral decay, and was disconnected from its divine elements, from all of the spirituality that it had achieved for itself, that embodied its lighter, more spiritually aware presence in the Golden Age. And that this is all part of a cycle that spirals downwards, sits in the Iron Age for around 10,000 years, and then slowly spirals outward. Well, guess where we appear to be right now? We appear to be on well, at least it's speculated that we're on the upward spiral from the Iron Age, which is pretty pathetic, kind of down there with the dustbins, spiraling out into the beginning of the Bronze Age. And so we have an opportunity to continue to spiral upwards, back into the Silver and then the Gold Age again. There's evidence of this relating to the cosmos as well, and the positioning of Earth in the planetary, in the solar system, its binary star being the sun, where the evolution of transition of the Earth around the sun demonstrates that there's a likelihood of a greater connectedness to spirituality at certain points in that revolution, and then we kind of get separated from the sun a little bit, which explains why we're less enlightened. It's all very complex. However, it demonstrates that nothing is absolute, that it just continues to go around and around. So if that's the case, we don't, we're here and we have this spiral aspect of our existence that's constantly in play. We have a perpetual energy that takes place, and we are constantly in the middle of this scenario where we have the darkness, which is attracted to things like fear and anxiety and anger, to having a battle with the light, which is attracted to things like love and tolerance and, a greater compassion towards others and an acknowledgement of our independence. So to have an acknowledgement and an appreciation for the interdependence between all living things. Something as simple as picking an apple from a tree when you don't need the apple suddenly becomes relevant, because if you don't need the apple and you waste the apple, then you've killed the opportunity for life to continue in some other form for some other purpose. It's not, it's kind of not that complicated. But it seems to be very difficult for us to grasp. And that's the reason why I wonder about which direction are we actually going in. Now, I have found a fellow here by the name of Ken Wilber. And Ken Wilber is a psychological theorist who invented a theory called the integral theory, which outlines 12 levels of consciousness. And those 12 levels of consciousness, Ken Wilber believes, can be traveled through in an ascending and a descending order, depending on a number of different factors. So let me go through these 12 levels of consciousness. I'm going to start at the bottom here. The first one is called archaic, which kind of is self-explanatory. This is a very basic level of consciousness. It's characterized by things like instinctive behaviors and survival-driven actions. So it's the stage of early childhood and infant development. So, when a baby is first born, if they're hungry, they cry. If they're uncomfortable, they cry. If they're in pain, they cry. They don't really have an awareness of anything other than that basic instinctive need. Like if I'm taking my dog for a walk, and it actually happened yesterday. We were coming home, just a little minor thing. We were coming home from a walk and I happened to step on a twig and the twig cracked under my feet. And I noticed my dog was on the lead and slightly in front of me. And when it cracked, she jumped as though she was going to run away. She didn't know what the sound was, but she heard the twig crack and her instinct was to flee. And then she kind of came to her senses and realized, Mummy stood on a twig. It's not a big deal. It's not even a thing. And she just kept walking. But that is the archaic, basic level of consciousness, the instinctive response to something. The second level up is magic. Sounds great, doesn't it? Well, it's a very low level of consciousness. At this level, individuals believe that their thoughts and their actions can directly influence the world around them. Now, I'm not, I don't disagree with that. I think that we can directly influence the world around us, but I don't think that that's it. And so the concept of the magical level of consciousness is that it's very basic. It basically is, if I want something, it'll happen. I'll make it happen. I'm going to make that $100 note come to me. Now, does this sound familiar? Have you ever seen that show or read that book called The Secret, which is how people can manifest what they want? It caters to a very basic level of consciousness, and that makes it so appealing. I remember seeing I saw it, I actually think I have the CD of this, it's like a 2-hour show, which is based on the book called The Secret. And there's an element in the show where a person is being dragged down by all of their bills. And the bills keep arriving in the letterbox. And the narrator says, don't worry about the bills in the letterbox. Stop thinking about the bills in the letterbox. Think about the money that you are going to make. Because if you think about the money you're going to make, then the money will be attracted to you and that'll just pay the bills. And I remember, there's an element of it that isn't exactly false, but it's so simplified that it's not true, if that makes any sense. You can't just conjure up $100 by thinking of $100. The mindset has to be that you're constantly moving forward and you're embodying what it takes to be able to meet your desires. So rather than sitting at home and stressing out about the fact that the bills are coming, well, you can't pay them if you're just sitting at home stressing. But if you think about the skills that you have and the opportunities that might be in front of you and the world and how it's structured and how you might be able to harness whatever is available to you to make yourself earn the money to be able to pay your bills, then you kind of stop thinking about the bills. You start thinking about your potential and you're inspired to move forward. And I believe that that is a very positive thing. But The Secret, that show and that book, only really get you to the point that's at that very low level of consciousness, in my viewpoint, where you believe that you can make it happen and therefore you make it happen. A bit like they say, if you want to be thinner, just believe yourself to be thinner. I don't think that actually works. And that would be catering at that magical level of consciousness. So the third one is the mythic level. And this is a stage that involves the use of myths and stories to explain the world. This can also be called the conspiracy theory level. So this is where people at this level, they rely on cultural narratives or religious beliefs or other types of kind of conflated explanations of things in order to explain their environment. So this is something that concerns me a little bit because, there are 12 levels of consciousness and this mythic level is just number 3. And so if you are using myths to guide your understanding of the world and explain how everything works by saying, the reason why I am, the reason why I'm unhappy, for example, is because this invisible cabal of people is deliberately creating obstacles for me to keep me unhappy, and therefore it must be their fault. Or, it could actually, the reality could be that there might be a chemical imbalance or some unresolved trauma or kind of this negative thinking that has created a pattern, or there might be a dynamic in your household that you need to relieve yourself of in order to stop reinforcing unhappiness and things like that. It could be that there's a lack of opportunity in your area. There could be all kinds of things. Maybe you don't have enough friends, you need to get out more. There could be all kinds of things. You might be living on a diet of sugar and cigarettes and alcohol, which provides nothing, no good substance of vitamins and minerals and other things to keep your body and your mind in shape. So it could be those things. But if you're sitting there and you're believing that there's some secret cabal that's making you unhappy, even though you can't prove that it exists, then you're kind of sitting in that conspiracy theory level, which is the mythic level, which is a very low level of consciousness. It's a bit scary because, we know people like that, and you can't even talk to people like that because they're stuck at level 3. So the next level is level 4, and that is the rational level of consciousness. Rational thinking begins to develop at this level. And people who are at the rational level, they start to use logic and reason to understand the world. And scientific thinking becomes part of their framework. So they may have cultural beliefs, they may have mythical beliefs, they may have magical beliefs, they may be relying on instinct, but they're also aware of the fact that there are scientific, rational explanations for things. And so, for example, it'll suddenly click to them that if they don't have a job, they won't have any money. Or if they sit at home and mope about how unhappy they are, then they will remain happy because there's nothing there to build from. And so just that simple thing, that acknowledgement, kind of boosts you up into the rationale level number 4. The next level is forward operational, so level 5. This stage is marked by the ability to think abstractly and logically. It's generally at that level of adolescence and early adulthood. So the formal operational level is perfect for people who are just leaving school, high school, and transferring perhaps into university, because this is where you begin to question things and use your critical thinking. This is often the age where a lot of you'll find another thing. Let's refer you back to YouTube for this one. There's a recent kind of influx of YouTube channels of people who are Reformed Christians, for example. And if you take a look at these influencers on YouTube, many of them are in the early adulthood phase of their life. And the reason for this is they were born into, say, for example, the evangelical church. I know that the evangelical church is not just a simple philosophy. You've got different branches and they have different beliefs. But let's just say they've gone to a less than transparent, or they were born into a kind of a less than transparent chapter of the evangelical belief system, where it's not really encouraged that people ask questions. It's not really encouraged that they debate what happens in the reference books that they're relying on, and that they are expected to believe exactly what their minister says, what the philosophies and the policies of the church are, and not to question that at all. Well, one of the natural things that happens when a person is in their early adulthood and their teenage years, for example, is they will begin to question, because their cognitive ability begins to elevate a little bit. And as soon as they question something, then they're heading into this formal operational level. And that's the reason why adults at around about that age, some of them begin dropping out of the church. Because when they take their questions to their pastor or their minister, if the questions are returned with an answer of, don't worry your silly head about it, just believe what I tell you because it's God's word, they're just not satisfied with that. So then they start to look deeper and they begin to look in the Bible for questions, and they still can't find the answers. And then they get frustrated and they start to lose faith and they start to shift away. And then they realize that there's alternatives out there, and they may decide that they're no longer believers and they drop out. And then they start YouTube channels talking about their journey as an ex-evangelical. Now, I've used the evangelical faith just as an example because it's so prevalent, and also because it's a topic of controversy and discussion at the moment. And so it's very relevant to the current day. So the next level is level 6, and that's the systematic level of consciousness. At this level, people start to see the world as a complex system of interconnected parts. That's a really good thing. This is where they develop the ability to think in terms of systems and relationships. So, for example, you might understand that it could be simple. I went through a program recently where I watched a lot of videos about the food industry. And, one really simple system is the way in which the sugar industry skyrocketed in the mid-20th century. So Americans, for example, had a relative, and that means all of Western society, because, here in Australia, we basically would follow what the Americans do. But Americans, as the dominant primary population that kind of led the way, went through this process prior to the mid-20th century where it was eating really healthy, straight from the farm kind of fresh foods, cooking from scratch. There weren't really that many restaurants. People weren't eating out very often. It was considered to be more of a luxury to eat out. And so they would eat very healthy foods that consisted of, natural unprocessed proteins and fresh fruit and vegetables, a bit of bread, and the introduction of things like pasta and noodles and things from other countries had already arrived, and rice and things like that. But it was pretty basic, almost like maybe close to what you'd expect the Mediterranean diet to be, but maybe without quite so much fish and a bit more beef. And then the sugar industry started to take off, and when it did, everything kind of changed. Instead of having bacon and eggs for breakfast, people started having cereals for breakfast. The cereals were marketed as being quick and nutritious and easy to prepare, and stick it in a bowl with some milk and send the kids to school, and that's just saved you half an hour of having to cook in the morning and things like that. And it was very cleverly marketed, except for the fact that it contained a lot of sugar, a lot of simple carbohydrates, and it created a nutrition deficit in the population that also increased hunger and cravings and began to spiral into an obsession with sugar. And then over the course of time, people became obsessed with sugar. This is an example of a system, right? Whether it's good or bad. Well, at the systematic level, level 6, this is where a person can see, while they're sitting there with their Ben and Jerry's, what's the tub that is supposed to be for 4 people, but we tend to eat the whole thing by ourselves. There's a phenomenon there, and we know that it's happening because we're sitting there eating our tub of Ben and Jerry's, but we know deep down inside that the reason why we're eating it is because we've been watching TV commercials, TV ads about how yummy all the new flavors are, and we went past the colorful advertising in the supermarket, and my favorite is the peanut butter chocolate with raspberry ripple. It's got all the flavors I love: chocolate, peanut butter, and raspberry. And it's in the supermarket, and I have to really put blinkers on to walk past the frozen aisle to avoid it, because it's just so good. And it's also inexpensive, and it's just, there are so many reasons to say yes. But the primary reason is I should really say no. But when I do sit down and eat it, I know that I've been manipulated into this cycle of eating sugar, and it's going to do me no good whatsoever. I'll feel bloated, and then I'll feel hungry again later, and chances are it won't be good for my skin and all of those things, and it's definitely not going to make me feel good about anything. I may end up with a sugar kind of mood later, post-sugar mood later, where I then have to prop it up with more. But at least I understand that there's a system involved that included lobbying and advertising and political influence and all those sorts of things. Well, that's level 6. Level 7 is the meta-systematic. And this is a stage that involves the ability to understand and integrate multiple systems. So a person can see the bigger picture and understand how different systems interact with each other. So, I've just used that sugar example. Well, I might be able to superimpose that onto farming practices and policy development and how much financial aid is given to farmers. Things like trade tariffs and, supermarket policies, and how it relates to the society's health, for example, and then health funding practices and health policy practices and things, and looking at it from a political and financial, a societal, a macro, a micro, and all of the interdependent kind of factors that link and connect to the sugar industry, right? So, for example, when your doctor tells you, okay, we'll use the example of weight again. You've been eating so much Ben and Jerry's that you've put on a ton of weight. I'm really simplifying here, but you've put on a ton of weight. And so you go to your doctor and you say to your doctor, I've put on a lot of weight. I need to do something. And your doctor says, oh, here, let me give you some pills. That'll help. So while you're munching your Ben and Jerry's with crunchy toffee bits in it, you just stick some pills in there and you're good. There's an interconnectedness there where rather than taking away the sugar, we just add a layer of medication to help resolve the issue caused by the sugar. That would be an example of the meta-systematic awareness at level 7, because you can see then that you're part of this complex system of lots of things that are taking place. So there you go. So number 8 is the parasystematic level. And at this level of consciousness, people can manage and coordinate multiple systems simultaneously. Say, for example, let's use something really controversial. The COVID pandemic. Okay. Oh, very controversial. During the COVID pandemic, this parasystematic thing occurred at level 8. Complexity and ambiguity. For the first few weeks that COVID was seriously considered to be a threat to humanity, potentially, all of the governments of the world, generally all of the governments of the world, there were a couple of examples, suddenly stopped what their normal course of business was. Australia was an example of that. Australia had we had a conservative government but not as conservative as the American conservative equivalent. So we still had a conservative government in. And when COVID hit in around about March of 2020, I think is when it really started to become a prevalent part of society, the government created a universal mandate that was managed by the states in which everyone had to stay home. They realized that this virus is getting out of control. Australia closed its borders to prevent new cases from coming in from anywhere, which meant that a lot of Australians who had been on holiday were kind of stranded at the airport terminals of foreign countries and things like that because they weren't able to get on a plane to come home again. I had a workmate who was one of those people. He was stuck in Fiji, which is, if you're going to be stuck anywhere, that's the place to be. And everyone was expected to stay home. Now, this lasted for 6 weeks. We were at home for 6 weeks and we didn't know what was going on. All we could see was we weren't allowed to go and visit the next door neighbour. We couldn't go and see relatives. We could only be in our own home, our own back garden. We were allowed to walk around our local neighbourhood or drive around our local neighbourhood, but we couldn't travel further than 5 kilometres, which is probably about 3 miles, I think, from home. And we were only allowed to be in the physical company of people that we already lived with. So even if your best friend was living across the street from you, you could sit in your driveway with a glass of wine and they could sit in their driveway with a glass of wine and you could spend the evening yelling across the street at each other, but you couldn't visit each other. And this lasted for 6 weeks. Nobody knew what was going on. We'd turn on television because that was our friend during that time, and there'd be a bunch of celebrities coming on and doing TV commercials about how they'd say, I'm afraid too, we don't know what's going on, but we want you to know that we're all in it together. And so whatever happens to one happens to all. This is Australia and we are one. And we kind of were terrified, except we kind of handled it because we understood that something very complex, potentially dangerous, that's very unknown is happening. It's hit us. People are getting terribly sick. The governments aren't really sure what's going on. And so they just need a moment for us all to just stay home and be quiet for our own safety. So they try and figure out what to do next. People who were able to understand that big picture could be examples of that systematic level of consciousness. It wasn't comfortable. It was a little bit frightening, a little bit scary, and really ambiguous and very complex. And we didn't really know what was going on during that first 6 weeks. But we thought to ourselves, all right, I'm going to order a jigsaw puzzle on Amazon and I'm just going to sit here and watch endless amounts of cooking shows and try to make my own bread and try and figure out where to get toilet paper from. And we're just going to write it out and see what happens. That would kind of be an example of someone who managed to make it to that level. There were those who didn't, though. There were those that went into a panic. And that was because of the fact that they couldn't handle the ambiguity and the complexity of this sudden kind of unexpected thing. So it just goes to show we're getting at levels 7 and 8 we're getting into a scenario where many people sit in when it comes to levels of consciousness, because remember, there's a gradient. Some people will be at level 7 or level 6 or maybe even level 3, and some will be at level 8 or 9 or even higher. So let's move on to the next one. The ninth level of consciousness is holistic consciousness. And this is a stage that's characterized by a deep sense of interconnectedness and unity. Okay. Individuals see themselves as being part of a larger whole, and they strive for harmony and balance. Am I one of those people? I don't know. But I do feel as though I think I'm growing into this kind of thing as the years progress, because I did something a little bit peculiar that could financially, end up being very damaging for me. And my finances are what keep me safe in the material world, This comfort and physical well-being is what makes the world go round, right? But I have opted towards wanting to change and wanting to move towards unifying rather than dividing, and wanting to help people to understand the framework that we exist in as much as I can, and to find evidence of more of related to that framework. But I don't want people to walk away feeling as though they've been excluded by me. And this is something that I hadn't thought of prior to the election. I had thought to myself, I'm right. I'm working on behalf of those who are right. I care about people. I want to fight for that. But now I think differently. I think to myself, well, all people are people. And people are coming from all different types of perspectives and walks of life. I want all of us to be okay, not just the ones that agree with me. And so I think I've kind of shifted to take on some of this level 9. And I think others have as well. A phenomenon has taken place as a result of the US presidential election, which is what sparked this conversation today, where people have walked away feeling as though they're in shock, a little bit like they did during the COVID pandemic, because something else happened during the COVID pandemic. Did you notice a lot of people left work and never came back again? And that's because during their time in kind of isolation, they got to understand themselves a little bit better. They got to see what made them tick and how they really felt about things and what they really wanted out of life, because they weren't busy listening to the alarm go off at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. and hurrying to feed the kids and hurrying to get showered and dressed and hurrying to catch the train and hurrying to get to work and hurrying to get their job done and then hurrying to come home and pick up the kids and take them wherever they have to go and hurrying to cook dinner and then hurrying to get to bed on time so that they can do it again tomorrow. Suddenly they were stuck at home and they had to reflect. And they never went back to their previous lives. And I'm kind of one of those people. But the election had the same result, where people kind of were in shock as a result of that election, because people were certain it was going to go the other way. And they've kind of gone off and hibernated, and some of them are emerging having changed. And I'm one of those people. Yet again, another layer of something has been added to my concept of reality and my concept of awareness. And this level 9 is where you start to think to yourself that there's an interconnectedness and a unity that must be preserved in order for us all to be whole. And if any of us are not whole, then that unity has not been achieved. And so rather than slicing off people who don't agree, I kind of feel now that it's more important for me to try to present an opportunity for there to be a reconnection. Doesn't mean we have to agree, but I want us to be present so that we have a chance. And I think if I've got it right, that's what level 9 is all about. So then we have level 10. And level 10 is relational. At this level of consciousness, people focus on building meaningful relationships and connections with others. They value empathy, they value compassion, and they value collaboration. Now, not the collaboration where you invite guests on to chat about their new book and stuff like that. Not that kind of collaboration, but about bringing people of all walks of life together to try and solve big problems. Something like an international forum of something or other, where not just the rich people flying in their private planes and eating all the good biscuits with their servants standing behind them. Not that kind of a forum. Oh, servants. I meant to say, paid for people, but they're servants, man. They're just probably paid a bit better, but they're still servants. Not that kind of a forum. I mean the kind of forum where there's a recognition and a coming together of all kinds of people. And I have a funny feeling that is coming soon. I think that's coming soon. I don't know if we're going to be arriving on purpose to this kind of a thing, but I think that there's going to be a kind of a circumstance coming soon where humanity is going to have to kind of come together to realize that everyone needs to be involved in this connectedness, just not just the rich folk, not just the ones that have power. And this is a level that I think humanity is having trouble reaching because there are so many distractions. So level 11 is communal, the communal level of consciousness. And this stage involves a strong sense of community and collective well-being. Individuals work together for the greater good and they prioritize social harmony. This is really difficult to achieve, really difficult. On a day-to-day basis, for example, if I put a video on YouTube that is a call towards some kind of a bigger message, and it's not even my viewpoint, it's sort of like, it might be my interpretation of something that has more wisdom than I do, I will inevitably fail because there will be someone who comes out of the woodwork that disagrees. And that's all that matters to them is that they disagree. And so this is a very difficult thing to achieve for humanity. And it should be noted that when you look at psychological reference guides when it comes to Ken Wilber's 12 levels of consciousness, some of those psychological guides, they don't talk about 10, 11 or 12 because they say that most of humanity isn't there yet. And so there's no point talking about it. And then level 12, the highest level, is the transcendental level of consciousness. And this is the highest level of consciousness, where individuals experience a sense of oneness with the universe. They transcend the individual identity and they connect with a higher universal consciousness, not just in principle, but they actually embody it. I don't think we're going to find anyone like that on YouTube, just to be fair, because I don't think YouTube is equipped to be able to deal with that. At best, we have number 10 or number 11. There'll be a few people who poke in and out of those levels of consciousness, being the number 10 being the relational and number 11 being the communal. But the transcendental folk, they're probably somewhere in some, ashram somewhere, and they're inaccessible to most of us. Now, it's really important to realize that there may be 12 levels of consciousness. There may be 8 levels. There may be 6 levels. It doesn't really matter how many there are because it all depends on how you slice it up. There are other people who have theories of there being more or less levels of consciousness, and I can rattle off some names. However, what they all agree on, and this is a multidisciplinary group of people. So they come from different walks of life. Some are scientists, some are philosophers, some are theologians, and then other disciplines as well. However, they all agree that humanity and individuals, whether it be, as a single individual, as a group, as a society, or as a whole, can transition through the upward direction of ascension into a higher level of consciousness, but can also descend into a lower level of consciousness. And the trend that affects the wider population of humanity is what sets the direction. So whilst one person may be ascending and another person is descending, humanity as a whole will follow the trend of what is most popular. And that's why it's really important to understand where you fit in that framework. So, for example, the things that impact personal, positive, upward movement include personal growth, things like emotional healing, intellectual development, and spiritual practices. So, learning, going out there and researching and finding out about yourself and about others and about the world, and also embarking on spiritual practices to sort of widen your perspective. These are all very positive things. There's also educational opportunities. So getting access to diverse experiences, getting out there and finding out more about the world and tapping into new experiences, sort of getting to understand the unfamiliar. That's a really good way to help to ascend upwards. Having healthy relationships, being part of a supportive community in some way, having positive social interactions, and having empathetic connections with other people. We also have mindfulness practices, so meditation, reflective practices, and healthy lifestyles. So, your healthy lifestyle can be things like wholesome pursuits, not overindulging in things like alcohol, staying away from recreational drugs, for example, eating healthy, exercising, and kind of following a path of positivity, getting outdoors and breathing fresh air and doing physical exercise that gets you close to nature, or even just being in the presence of natural things, I think is all examples of that. And then adaptive leadership, adding stability to your life and focusing on growth, not only for yourself, but for people around you, valuing the contribution that others make and allowing others to grow without it being seen as a threat to you. These are all really positive things that can help a person raise their consciousness, which in turn is, contagious and can help other people raise their consciousness. Negative influences that actually present a downward movement and a descension of consciousness include stress and trauma. So unresolved emotional issues, negative experiences, and toxic environments. I've talked about YouTube because I'm really familiar with YouTube. Someone who clicks into an environment, say a YouTube channel, that is constantly angry, constantly blaming, constantly finding reasons to hate on someone else or to accuse someone else. They might be right, they might be wrong. It doesn't matter about that. It's the toxicity of the environment that has the impact of stress. It creates anxiety and fear and sort of a lack of trust, a lack of cohesion, and that actually has an impact on the person who is absorbing that information. And then the next one is fear and instability. So crisis situations, fear-driven leadership. And YouTube influences are, for the purposes of this, a leadership factor. If it's driven by fear, then it creates that toxic environment of fear and instability that can actually lend itself to a downward movement of consciousness, a descension of consciousness. And then also things like societal breakdown. So, rivalry and hostility and division in society also creates a decrease or a dissension rather than ascension of society and its consciousness. Another thing is cognitive decline. So, of course, neurological disorders, lack of intellectual engagement, and sensory deprivation. Now, remember I talked about the concept of some of these young people who have left their religious beliefs that they were born into or grew up with. If you're not allowed to ask questions about something and you're told all the answers to everything you need to know are written in the Bible, and you shouldn't be looking outside of that for the answers, do you not think that might be a form of sensory deprivation? That's actually preventing you from being able to expand your senses so that you can take in more information and more perspectives and grow as a person. Well, that is a control mechanism. You also have, a family environment, for example, where it's very oppressive and children are not allowed to explore their own personalities as they're growing up. This is a form of sensory deprivation as well. You don't have to just be a hostage in a room with the blinds down and the door locked and you're not allowed to leave the room. That's not the only kind of sensory deprivation. There's other types as well that often are taken for granted as being just normal part of culture, but they're not. If they're preventing you from being able to naturally grow in any direction of awareness and knowledge that your consciousness just wants to take you, then that is a form of deprivation. And then also negative cultural influences. So things like toxic media, misinformation, and negative societal trends. The toxic media, the misinformation, and the negative societal trends are very hot at the moment. And so they really are some of the biggest risks associated with whether humanity is able to ascend to a higher level of consciousness as a group, but even as an individual. If you are spending your time addicted to the blame messaging, whether you believe it or not, it's actually doing you harm. I'll give you one example. There is this person who deals with astrology who has no relationship whatsoever to politics, none whatsoever. But she stated in a video that the cosmos and the planetary lineup predicted a certain outcome for the US election because she was predicting all kinds of things using astrology as her base. And she noticed that her viewership just went really high for that particular video, but also the nastiness, the trolls and the people who were abusive in the comments and everything was also something that appeared. And so a day or so later, she came on and she goes, oh, that was so icky. I understand, all I did was make a prediction like I do on everything else, but I really didn't like the nastiness that I experienced. And so I don't really want to make a habit of doing that. But then she did make a habit of doing it. And I've noticed that almost every single video that she's produced since then has had a political component to it. And you know why? Because it boosts her viewership and it boosts her subscriber base. And so she can't help herself. She goes, I'm not doing any harm. I'm just talking about my discipline. And that's where it is. The people gravitate to that. But you know what that is? That's anger, and it's fear, and it's anxiety, and it's a desperate attempt to hear good news. And so people gravitate to that, which means your subscriber base goes up and your viewership goes up and your money goes up. So your income goes up. If you look at some of these people, you'll see why they are continuing to stoke fear. I'll be blunt. The reason why they're continuing to stoke fear and the reason why they're continuing to stoke anxiety, and they call it all kinds of things. They call it love of country, or they call it expressing my truth, or they call it patriotism, or they call it, being right and justified. But it's not. It's a trap. And it caters to the lower levels of consciousness. It caters to the archaic thinking of instinct over intelligence, the magical level, which is level 2, which is this conflation that, if you think about something, you can make it happen. And this mythical element, which is the conspiracy theory generation. It isn't related to rationale. And the reason why I've presented all of this information to you today is not because I want to highlight anybody in particular, right? I gave you an example of someone that I think you will never identify. And that's the reason why I've used that person as an example, because they have nothing to do with anything apart from astrology. And there are thousands of astrologers on YouTube. They don't normally delve into politics, which means they're going to be very difficult to identify. And that's the reason why I mentioned them. But they have started to do so on a regular basis, because as much as they hate the trolls and they hate the negativity in the comments, they love the paycheck. And in the material world, that's where the dark force gets you. They give you that distraction of something that desperately, it caters to the desperate desire for material comfort, and it blinds you to the bigger picture. And then it attracts people who are also blinded to the bigger picture, which means that you kind of like magnets towards each other. So the person's algorithms improve, and so their monetary income skyrockets, and then people gravitate towards them because they're saying whatever it takes to keep that money going. They may even believe what they're saying. But the reason why is because they've been captured by the dark force of the material world. I know that I sound like the crazy one, but that's okay, I don't mind. Because my purpose for being here is a little bit different. I'm here because I saw something 40 years ago that just keeps coming back, and it keeps coming back. It doesn't matter how many times we think we've defeated it, it keeps coming back. A prophecy predicted the future, and so far, it just won't go away. And I think that prophecy might be an example of how the dark force is constantly banging at the door. And we keep opening the door, expecting to see light. I recently did an episode on Mary Magdalene's Gospel. This is the secret gospel of Mary. And it had such a profound effect on me. As I said previously, I've read the whole Bible. The Bible didn't do that. It was the Gospel of Mary that did it. And now I need to delve deeper. I really do. I need to look at lots of different things, just like I have been on this channel. But that sparked a seed in me. Mary said that when she privately spoke to Jesus, which made her very unpopular because, she's just a woman and why should she be special? But when she spoke to Jesus, Jesus said to her, now, this is the Jesus that I may or may not believe in, by the way, but I'm just working off the gospel. Jesus said to Mary that in order to beat the dark forces, you can't beat the dark forces with light. You can't pray it away. You can't, spiritually speaking, transcend above it. The way to beat the dark forces is to get one dark force to attack another dark force and get them to destroy themselves, because dark attracts dark and light attracts light. Our role is to attract light, and we can't do that by being fearful and anxious and angry. I'm not saying to go and kumbaya with everyone out in the field anywhere. What I'm saying is, what is it that you really want? Whatever it is you really want, attract that. Focus on that. My name is Ellie, and you can find me at Ellie Dreams and Under on YouTube. I also have a brand new book that's freshly published called Tarot Well Done, now available in paperback and ebook versions on Amazon. It's been almost 2 years in development, and I really hope you like it. To everyone who's listening today on KGRA's broadcasting platforms, thank you. If you'd like to be a member of the KGRA viewership family, then just go to live.kgradb.com and put in promo code Ellie to get 30% off your subscription. That's it for today. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.